So what we have here is we now have our compound interest formula. So the formula that we kind of generated at the bottom of the previous page, which we said was kind of related to our compound interest formula, we've basically taken that formula and we've added this n, which is our number of compoundings per year, right? So we're going to say we added n to our formula from the previous page. All right, so as we're looking at this, again, our P is still our principal, our R is still our interest rate, our T is still our time, our A is still our amount at the end. Again, the only thing that we've done that we've added is this letter N, which is our number of compoundings per year. All right, so looking at this formula, the N does show up in two places, and one place is a division, another place is a multiplication. I'm not going to get too far into detail as far as why we're dividing and multiplying here, but it has to do with the idea of keeping everything yearly to make everything match up. So example 3, we are going to actually go back through what we did in our first example. Our first example, we deposited $100 into a 1-year certificate of deposit paying 10% that was compounded quarterly. We went through and we figured out 4 different values to find out our end amount. But in this case, we're going to determine the amount F to which the $100 deposit will grow in a year. And instead of doing it in 4 steps like we did in the last page, in the last example, we're going to do this in 1 step. Okay, so as I've done most of these problems in this chapter, I'm going to start by writing out my formula. Again, you do not need to worry about memorizing these formulas. You just want to make sure you know how to use them. However, I do strongly suggest kind of writing them out as you're setting up a lot of your problems. Okay. All right, so we're going to start by making a list. So our P is 100. That's our principal that's being invested. Our R, our interest rate, is 10%. Our time is 1 year. And our N, the number of times that this is compounded per year, right? Quarterly means 4. So we're going to plug all of those values in there. All right, so let's plug these in. So P is 100 times 1 plus R, 0.10, divided by N, which is 4, right? Raised to the N times T power. So we have 4 times 1. I know that's a little tiny, but I'm trying to squeeze all of this in here. I'm going to simplify this a little bit. So I will show this broken down step by step, and then we'll kind of give you a shortcut to how to work through and do this on your calculator. Okay. So we'll keep our 100, 1 plus. So the first thing I'm going to do into my calculator is type my division and my multiplication. So 0.10 divided by 4 is going to give me 0.025. Right, so I've just done that division from this step to this step. And then I'm going to do this multiplication. That doesn't really require a calculator. 4 times 1 is 4. Right. Then we're going to have 100 times 1.025. We're going to add these two together. Right, so we get 1.025 to the 4th power. And then into our calculator, we're going to take this 1.025 to the 4th power. And we're just going to keep a bunch of the decimals that we have here, 1.103813. That should be more than enough. And then we're going to multiply this by 100. We get 100, oops, not 100, 110. 0.3813. We've just shifted our decimal point over a couple of places by multiplying by this 100. which then we're going to round to a final dollar amount of $110.38. Right, now, if we go back to example 1 on the previous page, notice that our final answer that we have here, this $110.38, that's the same that we just got using our formula. Right, now, I did just work through this showing each of our different steps. As we're doing these, if we end up with a bunch of decimal values that don't round, we want to err on the side of caution, and we want to keep a bunch of decimal places. So notice that our final answer, we only wanted 2, but I kept about 6 here. Right, so don't cut off decimals too early. We've seen, or hopefully you've seen, as we've been going through my math lab, that it is pretty picky about rounding. So we want to make sure we do our rounding correctly. So as you're working these steps in the middle here, if something doesn't work out nicely, keep 5, 6 decimals. Right, it's better to keep too many decimals than to not keep enough. Now, I said that using this formula was supposed to be easier than doing all those different previous calculations at the bottom of the last page. That is definitely true. And what we see down in this next little box here is a list of calculator help. So I do want to show you how to go through and do this. As we continue to go through this chapter, you're going to see these little calculator help bubbles pop up for a lot of different examples that we're going to do. I will also be posting separate documents kind of with reminders and step-by-step instructions as we're going through and we're working on these problems. And then in this case, at least for some of these, not necessarily all of these, I'm going to show kind of the steps to go through and work through this on a calculator. All right, so I'm going to start with just your basic scientific calculator. So you don't need a big, huge, fancy graphing calculator. We just need a basic scientific calculator. All right, so I'm going to try to get this in my screen here. Right. At the same point in time, I want to leave my calculator help, so let's shift this a little bit this way and slide that in there. All right, so we're going to start by writing 100 and then our multiplication symbol. So 100, and then we're using our multiplication symbol. And hopefully you can kind of see that popping up in our window up at the top. And then I'm going to start with parentheses, and we do have parentheses buttons right here in the middle. So we're going to use our parentheses buttons, and I'm going to write 1 plus 0.10 divided by 4. Right? So we don't need to put in any extra parentheses or anything. We're just going to type in that 1 plus 0.10 divided by 4. But then we do want to make sure that we close off our parentheses after we put that 4 in there. So make sure you close off those parentheses after you put in that number that you're dividing by. And then in some cases, it depends on the type of calculator that we have. We may have a Y to the X button, or in this calculator, we have this little button, we call it a caret button. This lets us do exponents. So I'm also just going to make a little note here that our Y to the X button is more often seen as a caret button. If we're looking at a graphing calculator, granted I just have an old TI-83 handy here at home, but notice that we do have a little caret button here as well, right? And we do have the parentheses. So whether you're using a scientific calculator or graphing calculator, again, more sophisticated graphing calculators have slightly different steps. If you start working through problems and you're having questions about the calculator, please feel free to reach out to me. I will gladly help you out. And then in our last set of parentheses, we're just going to type 4 times 1. If you want to make it easy, we know that 4 times 1 is 4. Or if you just want to plug in what we have in our original formula, that's what we're going to do. We hit the equals button down at the bottom. Oops, I missed my caret button. I talked about it, but I didn't actually hit it. 0.10 divided by 4 caret, there we go, 4 times 1. Talked about it, I just didn't press it, so we'll get that fixed in there. All right, so now we see that caret button show up on our screen as well. Now we hit enter, and notice that we get what we had up here, right? 110.3812891, which then we can round off. 12891, which then we're going to round off to $110.38. Right, so as you're working through these problems, feel free to work through things step by step, like I do here, or also feel free to use these calculator shortcuts. Remember that Y to the X button is also our little caret button, depending on different types of graphing calculators, scientific calculators that you may have. If you have a different type, different brand, please, again, if you're having questions, reach out to me. Let me know. A lot of this section and a lot of the rest of this chapter is going to hinge on whether or not we can enter things into our calculator correctly. So as I'm going along and doing my examples, I would strongly recommend that you're practicing with your calculator, making sure that you're getting the same answers that I'm getting, because that's just going to help you in the homework.